Hey there, everybody. Welcome along to a session that I'm running to help anybody who's out there looking for work at the moment. There's a lot of jobs being posted, there's a lot of people applying for the jobs, and there's some tips that I'll share with you that will help with that process, but also a lot more I want to cover that will give you a much broader sense of what you can think about when it comes to searching for work. So there's 9 tips I'm going to share with you today on job hunting. And you may not end up doing all of them. Some of them you're probably already quite familiar with, but covering them from 1 to 9 in detail, and then I'll recap at the end, will hopefully make sure you've got a comprehensive plan to help you on your job hunting. So recording this just before Christmas time, unfortunately it doesn't have a festive vibe to it, but it does mean that it's well positioned, hopefully, to set you up for success in 2025 if part of that is looking for a new role. Whether that's something you're going to launch into come 1st of January and you're going to be really actively looking, or perhaps you just want to be changing at some point next year, but you're not desperate to jump into something new. So there'll be some things that you can do that can help you with a more passive job search and make sure you've found the right thing rather than gravitate towards the first thing. I think if you talk to anybody that's picked up a job, then largely what you'll find is, excuse me, is that people will say, do you know what? I got this job and I got really lucky because of X or because of Y. Whereas in reality, if you looked across all the people that look for jobs, yes, there's an element of good fortune, but they've probably increased their surface area of luck by doing a number of different things. And that's exactly what I'm going to cover with these 9 tips today. So Dennis, hi, thanks for commenting there. Make me realize that there's definitely someone out there watching it. Please, along the way, although I've got some stuff to cover, then do throw in any questions you've got, anything that you want me to go back over, or anything specific to your job search, then throw that in. And if it's appropriate, I'll cover it at that point. If not, then I'll make sure I leave time at the end as well. And this year, depending on your job situation, I imagine has been pretty challenging. We've seen within our business, ISL Talent, some 30% more job applications on average. If we post an advert now, maybe we get 4, 5, sometimes 600 advert responses. And from a candidate perspective, lots of people are using automation and AI and tools to apply for many more jobs than they would have done before. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing or something I'd advise against, but it does mean that put all those things together and it's a little bit overwhelming for people on both sides of the process. But definitely for you as candidates looking for jobs, it can feel pretty mindlessly numbing, I know for sure, to be applying and not hearing back or not feeling you're making the traction that you want to. So there is some stuff that I'll talk about today that will help with the job application process. But really, my key takeaway from today is that that's not the only tactic you should be using. And it is indeed a tactic rather than a strategy. So if 95% of your efforts at the moment are based on applying for jobs, then fair play to you, because I know that's a monotonous task. There's stuff I'll talk to you today that will show there's a lot more that you can be doing and indeed should be doing to have that variety, going back to my point on luck, that will help you to get that element of good fortune and find the right thing. So the first thing that I want to talk about today is something that comes from Japan, something called Ikigai, Ikigai. And it's I think in the West, we've probably morphed it in something that wasn't its true intention, but it's a model that I've seen lots of candidates use really effectively to figure out what they want to be doing next. Now, some of you will be already really clear on what that is, but for others, maybe you're looking for a job unexpectedly, or you're thinking that you want to make a change, but you're not exactly sure what that change would be. And Ikigai is a really useful model to be able to think through that and to give you the different perspectives that you'll need on that. So let me share with you what the model actually looks like. So this is the Ikigai model, and to make sense of it, there's 4 circles here. So what you're good at, what you love, what the world needs, and what you can be paid for. And the principle being that if you find something that aligns with all four circles, that's ikigai, the sweet spot in the middle, the meaning of life, I think it translates as. And it may not be that it's one job or even necessarily a job that gives you all those things. But when I've worked with candidates, particularly senior candidates, to help them think through next steps, getting them to spend time making notes on what they're good at and what they enjoy as a starting point can be really useful to make sure they've tried to capture the key things from their role that they'd love to take into their next role. That, of course, needs to be balanced with what the world needs. So there's no point being good at something that there's no demand for. And of course, the reality of work is that a lot of us are doing it because there's, an income to be gained from it. That's hopefully not the only reason, but no doubt that's one of the reasons that many of us go to work. So you need to make sure that you can be rewarded for what you're doing. And being able to spend some time reflecting on these things is a really useful way to help think through what you're going to focus on in that next step. And you may be looking quite broadly, which is fine, but in terms of that sweet spot and what you really want to be working towards, short term, medium term, and longer term, Ikigai can be a really useful model to be able to think through that and to articulate that both to yourself, but also to others. So that's one exercise I definitely recommend you spending some time on. In terms of the second step, then that's to, of course, you'll need a CV. Rarely are jobs found without CVs, but I'd really get you to look at your own CV and double check that it's one that is unique to you and has tangible achievements. So what do I mean by that? Well, many CVs I see, and just to give a bit of context, I've worked in recruitment for over 20 years, helped thousands of candidates get jobs at hundreds of companies. So ISL Talent as a business, we recruit for technology startups and scale-ups, predominantly in the UK. So typically businesses 10 to 100 employees. But in my career, I've recruited for everybody from Tesco to the NHS to a 1 or 2 person business. And I've worked with candidates that have been in technology, in sales, in leadership, operations, finance, so across a really broad spectrum. So as you might imagine, I've seen a lot of CVs in that time, and some good and some definitely not so good. One of the things that really doesn't help a CV stand out is if it's generic. So if 5 of you listening into this session are chief technology officers, if your CVs all look the same, then something's gone wrong. Because what should actually be the case is your CV should talk about not only and not predominantly your role and your responsibilities, but much more about the achievements, the impact that you made. What was it that was meaningful about you being there for the 12, 24, 36 months that you were? How did you help that business go from A to B? What was it you were particularly proud of? So if you're a salesperson, then maybe it's really easy to put numbers down in terms of, achievement against target, number of clients won, revenue gained on an annual basis, and how that improved year on year. But if you're in technology, maybe there's something around reducing technical debt or growing the technical team. If you're in marketing, maybe there's some measures around the cost of customer acquisition or the efficiency of the channels you're using. I think whatever your role is, it should be really clear as to what you were able to achieve in the role. And many people can talk about that, but for whatever reasons, they leave it off their CV. So going back to the situation where if I'm looking at 5 people's CVs, if they've got much more focus on the achievements and the impact you made, it's a lot easier for me to judge whether you're going to be relevant for the role I'm looking for. So point 2 is really around, yes, of course you need a CV, but it needs to be one with tangible achievements. Now, point number 3 is, I guess the final point as part of establishing product market fit. So it's sort of crudely breaking things down. You're the product and you want to take that product to market. The CV is a big part of how you'd articulate the value of that product, at least to begin with. And if you're a founder taking a product to market, you obviously need to understand the language and the value proposition to your buyer. So without too tenuous link, bringing it back to your CV, what you need to make sure is that that is written in a way that resonates with the buyer. So if you're a chief technology officer and in effect your buyer is going to be a chief executive officer or founder, then what is it that you've done that will help tie into what they're looking for? And that's partly the achievements that I mentioned earlier on, but also when it comes to things like your profile or talking about what you're looking for next, then how can you link that into their pains, their challenges, the things they're looking to achieve? You need to help them go from A to B by selling yourself, and your CV, the way you approach them, the way you explain your value has got to link into that. So this third point is around knowing the pain points of your buyer, the language, and making sure that's reflected in your CV. So not just achievements, but also what's the journey that you are able to take someone on. So I've read loads of CVs before that do talk about achievements, but when I look at it, it's quite difficult to think about how can this person help me as a potential buyer of that individual, as a potential employer. The best ones are the ones that make it really clear how this person is going to help me scale my technology team or enter the US market and develop a go-to-market proposition. So as much as you can bring that into your CV and generally speaking, your articulation of the value, the better. So this first 3 points, just to recap, are around figuring out what you want, and Ikigai is a great tool I'd recommend there. Creating a CV with tangible achievements and making sure you understand the language of your buyer. Now, those 3 things will help you when it comes to applying for jobs, but the 6 points that I'm going to move on to are probably much more on the distribution side of things. So how do you reach the jobs? And particularly bearing in mind that there's various data out there and some of it is perhaps not as accurate as others, but the majority of jobs, aren't filled through adverts. So networking, referrals, recommendations, recruiters are a big part of how many jobs are hired into, and many of those never reach advert stage. Or if they do reach an advert stage, the reality is there's already people in process. So if you're only applying for jobs all the time, you're either missing out on many jobs or you're behind the curve on the ones you are applying for. So being able to know how to reach that sort of hidden jobs market, if you like, or at least uncover the opportunities that won't be obvious to everybody, is a big part of how you'll make sure you can maximize your chances of finding the right job in 2025. So I'm going to move on to point number 4. But as I mentioned before, if there's any comments, questions, feedback, then drop it into the chat and I'll make sure to pick up on that as I go. So point number 4 is, yes, about applying for jobs, but with a follow-up. So going back to what I mentioned before, if we're getting 300-400 applications for a role, the founders that I talk to, they'll be experiencing exactly the same. Then you need to play the game and go through the process and make sure you're putting your CV into the mix. But anything you can do to stand out to that founder or to that hiring manager is really going to maximize your chances of being the person that they decide to contact rather than move on into that for another day pile. So that might be about messaging the founder, connecting with the existing team. It might be about following them on LinkedIn or social media and engaging with some of their content. These things aren't going to be game changers in isolation, but doing them consistently across the roles you apply for definitely help to put you front of mind when it comes to looking at how people are filtering through those initial applications. You may be applying for jobs on LinkedIn, which is fine. And there's also the generic jobs like Indeed, etc. But if you're looking to work in a certain sector, so for example, in startups, there'll be startup focused jobs. So things like work in startups or Otter, Venture Loop, those are all sites that particularly focus on the startup side of things. If you're looking to work in technology or in legal or compliance, again, there'll be different job boards that will focus on those certain aspects. So don't just rely on the generic job adverts, and making sure you're having some sort of follow-up. Point number 5 is having a system to engage with your network. So most people will say when it comes to looking for work, then make sure to engage your network. But more specifically, what does that look like and what might that mean? Well, one of the things that I think is useful to illustrate a set of tactics here or a system is someone called Robin Dunbar came up with the concept of a friendship circles. So I've got a slide that I can share to show these. So he talked about these concentric circles, which right in the middle, your closest and intimate friends is only a handful of people. Expanding out to your best friends, good friends, acquaintances, and known names. Now, I know I would definitely struggle to recognize 5,000 faces. I sometimes struggle to recognize the face of someone I spoke to on Zoom last week. But the principle being that you will have these different set of connections to people in your network, and you need to make sure you're covering all of those. The way you approach those people will differ depending on which of those circles you're in. So if it's a close friend, you're probably much more transparent with them and open with them. But as you go out, then what you don't want to do is ignore those slightly weaker connections that could be really valuable to get you new roles. What you don't want to do is to go to those connections and say, hey, I'm looking for a job. Do you know anybody who's hiring? You'll find if you do that, you get quite a binary yes or no. So yes, I do know somebody, or no, I don't. And there's some value in that, but it's really limited. Whereas if you go to one of those circles, maybe the 50 or 150 people that you know to a degree, and talk to them about exploring career options, have they got any advice, or simply just having a catch up with them and understanding the journey they've been on, you'll learn a lot from that. So you'll get some good advice. Maybe they'll be able to signpost to you or explain to you how they found their last role. But you'll also get sight of the jobs. They will say, and by the way, I know so-and-so who's hiring, or we've got an opportunity at my company. So you won't lose out on the immediate jobs. You'll get the learning on top. So I think there's a phrase around asking for advice and not jobs. Asking for, if you want money, ask for advice. And if you want advice, ask for money. And that's really point number 6 here, is as well as having a system to engage with your networks, then making sure you're asking for advice and not jobs when you go into that network. Now, some people I've spoken to who have found new roles have been very systematic. They've got an Excel spreadsheet. They will look at approaching 5-10 people every day or every week or month, depending on the urgency and the time you've got. Others will leave it a little bit more loose in terms of their system and just make sure they're spending time out and about engaging with their network and developing new contacts. So whichever one you choose, the key points here are to have a system to engage with your network and to make sure you're asking for advice rather than simply asking for jobs. So that's point 5 and 6. So the final 3 points. So number 7 is around being visible. And on social media, or probably for the majority of you, and bearing in mind this is being broadcast on LinkedIn Live, I'm talking about LinkedIn here. Now, you don't need to be posting every day, and maybe you don't even need to be posting, but you need some sort of activity on LinkedIn that is going to raise your profile within your network and put you front of mind and just trigger those potential connections that might link you into a job that someone's aware of. So some people will choose to, or be able to, post on LinkedIn they're looking for work, and that can be a really effective way to get old colleagues or clients, suppliers, people that you know in your network to think of you for what's coming up. So if you can do that, then great. I definitely encourage that. If you can't do that, I know it's not always practical, particularly if you're in a job at the moment and looking for a job, but it's not publicly known, then simply being more active on LinkedIn can be a great way to put yourself out there and keep front of mind with potential hiring managers and people that might be aware of jobs. So that could be at a basic level, I suppose, making sure your LinkedIn profile is up to date. So it's got your skills on there. Lots of recruiters, both internal and with recruitment consultancies like ISL Talent, will do searches on skills to find candidates. So although you might have what you've done written in the description of your role, if it's not in the skills, you're probably missing out on being selected by certain people who are out there sourcing. So putting your skills in, making sure you've got your updated job titles and your work history. In terms of job titles, there is some sophistication to some of the searching, but I'd probably go as mainstream as possible. I wouldn't abbreviate. So if you've been a manager, I'd write that out in full rather than write MGR. All these things just maximize your chances of being caught by searches and having that initial conversation where hopefully it's less around a Boolean search and triggering an algorithm, but more around getting to know you and giving you clarity on the opportunities. Making sure you've got the correct dates in there, that your education is on there. So covering all the basics from a profile perspective, putting your photo on there, maybe putting a header. The second step might be to do some engagement. So people that you see in your network posting, commenting on their posts. That could be 1 a week, it could be 5 a day. Again, depends on what's realistic for you, because this might be obvious, but if they're posting to their network and you're commenting on those posts, your comment will then go into the feed and into the awareness of their broader network. And if your profile is optimized and set up correctly, whether it says that you're definitely looking for work or whether it just talks about what you've done, it increases your exposure to other people and maximizes your chances of being thought of for that next opportunity. So having your profile basic level complete, doing some engagement, those are the first 2 steps in how I would approach LinkedIn. Now, that third step is definitely to post, and that may not be for everybody. You might decide to do it every day. You might decide that you're going to do 1 a month. I'm not here to kind of say you what's right and wrong, but if you are going to post, again, you may be able to post that you're open to work, but maybe you're posting about lesson learned, something topical, something personal, with a bit of a human connection, something if you've been in work for 15 years, something you've learned around whatever it is you do. Anything really that's partly going to tick a box of posting, but also hopefully demonstrate that you've got some experience to talk about, and whether it's a few lines or whether it's a longer post, that you're able to articulate that and talk about that in some way. So those 3 things really are all encompassed under number 7, which is being visible, particularly on LinkedIn. That could be your profile, could be a profile plus some engagement. It could be a profile plus some engagement and plus some posts. On the open to work functionality, then one thing that you may not be aware of, so you can come up with a green label over your profile picture, which will signal to the whole world. But if you're not able to do that, if it's not appropriate, if you change your profile to open to work on LinkedIn, that's something that recruitment teams will see, but the general public can't see. So that would definitely trigger more interest, more inbound interest in your profile than if you don't mention at all that you're open to work. So if a recruiter's searching and they find 1,000 profiles, all things being equal, they're likely to focus to begin with on those that have marked themselves as open to work, which could be 5, 10, 25% of the overall talent pool. So if you mark yourself as open to work, you're more likely to come up towards the front of their search or perhaps be contacted initially. Now, point number 8 is around being active in your community. Now, I'll talk a bit more about what community means, but just generally speaking, these are things that will maximize your chances of being thought of for a next opportunity. So if you, this could be going to events, it could be active in WhatsApp group, on Slack channels, in LinkedIn groups. If you are, for example, in climate in London, then maybe there's things like London Climate Connection and Climate U that you can become part of, whether it's virtually or physically. You can go there and have conversations, raise your profile, and maximize your chances of someone thinking of you for a role they may be looking for or might be thinking of in the future. You can sign up to newsletters so you can enhance your awareness. And at the moment, you may feel that where you want to be working is quite aligned to where your network is, in which case, hopefully, you're well aware of these opportunities to get out there and be active. If you're in a community over here and actually you want to be working over there, then you perhaps have to work a bit harder to bring those two circles together. But the principle remains the same. It's going to be events and conferences. It's going to be following thought leaders in the sector. It's going to be looking at newsletters and comms channels from WhatsApp to Slack and and groups on LinkedIn and other social media. So being active in your community is a key point as well. And the final point, so number 9 here, is around finding those growth companies. And they may not always be advertising for roles, but the companies that are growing will, of course, advertise for roles at some point, but they also will be well aware that they're looking to double their headcount or go from 10 to 15 or 50 to 70 in the next 12 months. So they should be actively engaging with the right talent that's going to potentially help them to grow and scale and maximize their impact. So finding those growth companies. Now, where would I look for those companies? Well, going back to the community point I mentioned before, you'll find them talking at those events, out and about. They'll be at pitch events looking to raise investment, of which a large proportion will often go on hiring. They'll be on hot lists, so top 100 companies in the UK or top 50 fintech companies, top 20 people building something in climate tech, whatever the list may be. Some of it will be sector, some of it will be location, some of it will be on stage. So you'll need to work out which are the best ones for you. Awards, sometimes people can be cynical about the integrity of the awards, but any company that's out there putting themselves forward for awards at the moment is probably thinking about growing, has probably got the appetite to do more in the next 12 months. So being aware of those companies is likely to align quite nicely with the companies that could be hiring in the future. And also thinking about cool products that you see out there. So I remember talking to someone a little while back who had learned about a really cool video messaging tool called Skype when no one else was really aware of it. Message the founders and say, hey, I love what you're building here, and ended up doing some fractional finance work for them. So we'd identified a company that was in growth mode initially just by seeing a cool product out there that he thought was something that he wanted to explore a bit more. So there's a few different ways that you can find those growth companies, but it can be a really powerful way to connect with founders and leaders and hiring managers at companies that aren't advertising, at least at this stage, and being inundated with loads and loads of applications. So I think that pretty much concludes the key 9 steps that I wanted to do, just to kind of recap on those here. So these are the 9 points that I've covered. So we talked to begin with about the first 3, making sure you're really clear on what you're looking for. So using Ikigai to figure out what you want, ensuring your CV has got a sense of achievement and that that's personal and unique to you, and that it aligns with the buyer's language. Number 4, when you're applying for jobs, try and stand out in some way with a follow-up or some engagement. Have a system for networking, and when you're approaching that network, ask for advice and not jobs. And then the final 3, to be visible on LinkedIn, to be active in the community, and to find those companies that are signaling ambition and likely to be growing in some way. So those are the things that, if you're setting yourself up for success in 2025, if you can do all of those things, you may not choose to do them all in equal measure. So you have to experiment a little bit and see which ones you get your energy from and which ones are perhaps more relevant to the search that you're looking to go on. But if I think about the hundreds of candidates that I've either helped secure jobs or I've talked about how they've got their jobs at the moment, and I think largely the activities they've done over and above applying for jobs, which I would still encourage you to do but not rely on, then these are often how they've gone about securing those roles. So I hope that's been useful. As I mentioned, ISL Talent is a business that recruits for startups and scale-ups. So if you're looking to work in those types of businesses in the UK, then keep an eye on the jobs that we've got advertised, and hopefully we can help you more directly in terms of finding a new job. Once you get that new job, if you need to hire good people, particularly in technology and commercial, then hey, of course, we'd love to talk to you. Um, if you've got any comments or questions, then you can comment on the session here and I'll happily respond to it, or drop me a message and I'll come back to you with anything additional that could be useful. And if you feel this is some content that is going to be useful for people you know who are thinking of looking for a new job or are focusing on it right now, then please tag them in the comments or share it with them so they can have a watch too. Thank you very much for joining. I hope that's been useful. Have a great Christmas break, and I'll run similar sessions again in the new year. So do look out for those. But in the meantime, then all the best as you look for a new role. Thanks very much.